When even the original Secretary of Homeland Security admitted he didn't know why colleagues inside the Bush administration often pressured his department to raise the terror threat level for what the experts thought were trivial developments, we unfortunately must acknowledge that we live not just in an age of terror, but also in an age in which terror is exploited by politicians who are sworn to protect us from terror. Our third story tonight: we have not had a terrorist incident in this country of any note since 2001, nor have we had any exploitation of terror since this morning. The Senate last night voted not just to legalize eavesdropping, but also, instead of pursuing the crime, it voted officially, formally, to cover it up by shutting down the only avenue left to discover what actually happened: the dozens of lawsuits against collaborating telecom companies. Unlike the Senate, Democratic leaders in the House passed a version of the wiretapping law, FISA, last year that does not include telecom immunity. This morning, Mr. Bush said that if the House does not yield to the Senate version and give the telecoms immunity, we will all die. All right, I'm paraphrasing there, but not by as much as you might think.
Good morning. At this moment, somewhere in the world, terrorists are planning new attacks on our country. Their goal is to bring destruction to our shores that will make September the 11th pale by comparison. There's no reason why Republicans and Democrats in the House cannot pass the Senate bill immediately. The House's failure to pass the bipartisan Senate bill would jeopardize the security of our citizens.
The current bill expires Saturday, after which the Bush administration would actually have to use warrants, just like law-abiding presidents, to conduct their wiretaps. This afternoon, the House leadership failed to pass a 3-week extension of the FISA Act. Republicans preferring to let the law expire rather than expose telecoms to legal liability. Evidently, they also think the president's statement this morning was an exploitation of terror threats. Let's turn now to Jonathan Turley, professor of constitutional law at George Washington University. Much thanks for your time tonight, John.
Thanks, Keith.
Put the Senate vote in perspective for us in terms of protecting the Constitution as opposed to covering up White House crimes.
Well, putting aside that this bill is trying to preserve a court with very questionable constitutional foundation, it was designed in part to circumvent the Fourth Amendment. But the immunity component literally has no public interest value. It is there to extinguish dozens of suits that are before federal courts, and it's an attempt before those courts can declare what the president did as illegal and what these companies did as illegal to shut them down. And so the Senate is actively working with the White House to cover up a crime. And you have this bizarre situation with the executive and legislative branch joining together to shut down the judicial branch to keep judges from declaring an unlawful program.
So if every plausible argument for immunity got a proposed amendment yesterday, the government would take the defendants' roles in lawsuits, the FISA court would vet the lawsuits, etc. These were all rejected by Republicans. Is the point of immunity purely to stop these lawsuits and thus to stop any information getting out? There has been some estimation in this that this is in fact spinning forward to protect whatever the White House has next intended in terms of prying onto the Internet in particular?
Well, it's not just Republicans. In case you noticed, there's more than 31 Democrats in the Senate, but only 31 people voted against the immunity provision. The fix has been in for some time on the unlawful surveillance program and the torture program. Many Democrats and Republicans were aware of the program, and they're actively helping the White House to try to shut down any confrontation on the issue. And this is also helped by the fact that the telecoms are one of the 5 most powerful lobbying forces in Washington, and many of these members have close ties to those lobbyists.
All right, if this immunity passes, it looks like it may be unstoppable at this point. Question number 1, could the next Congress revoke the immunity? And question number 2, could a Democratic president or some form of enlightened Republican have his or her attorney general investigate not just the telecoms, but also the Bush officials who had ordered the wiretapping in the first place?
Well, it's going to be hard to get this cat to walk backwards once you grant immunity. The question about the next president is a good one, but you'll note that in the vote on immunity, Hillary Clinton didn't even show up to vote. She was in the area campaigning. Her opponents, McCain and Obama, showed up. But it really, I think, is symbolic of this disconnect between here you've got someone who's campaigning for the President of the United States, making pitches of civil libertarians, but doesn't even show up when she's in the neighborhood to vote against telecom immunity. And I'm not just dumping on her. The fact is that there has been a lot of really duplicitous work being done by both parties to shield what has been a very fixed deal from the beginning on telecoms.
Right, well, let's point the finger at one of the parties. Senator Dodd has a filibuster threat. It still stands. But yesterday, the Senate leader for the Democrats, Harry Reid, let a Democratic measure fail, even though it had 57 votes, because he was honoring the effect of a GOP filibuster, a virtual filibuster, without actually making them filibuster. Where's the Democratic Party on this?
Yeah, Keith, you're absolutely right. This is one case where the Democrats cannot make any plausible claim that they couldn't block this vote. They could have done it easily. Not only are they in the majority, and the Republicans as the minority block votes all the time, but Harry Reid made decisions that made it virtually impossible for civil libertarians to win. One of the things he did is he favored the Senate Intel Committee, which after all knew about this program, concealed this program, and he let them take the lead. That made it much more difficult for civil libertarians to prevail.
Prisons are bipartisan. Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. Great, thanks, John.
Thanks, Keith.